Welcome everybody to Mark Z and my discussion on Way of Kings, the first book in the Stormlight archive. Is this a review?
It's a review
You want to call it a review?
because I'm going to give a score at the end for no
Okay.
reason. Totally arbitrary out of 10
All
score.
right. I don't know if I'm going to give a score. We'll find out. But either way, welcome back to my book YouTube channel, Travis Gafford Books. Hopefully you saw the first episode that came out, the first video where I was talking about sort of the books that I recommend. One of those books that I recommended was this one, again, Way of Kings. If this is going to be very spoiler filled, so like if you care about spoilers, if you are going to read this book, don't watch this.
It's spoilers for this book only. We will
Yes.
not ruin the Cosmere. We won't ruin book 2 and book 3. It's only spoilers for this book, and then next book we'll do another review, and then a third, and then I think we'll probably do a like speculation video heading into Rhythms of War.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't know, this is the first book in a 10-book planned series. 3 of them are out now. The 4th one is coming out in just a couple of months. Very excited about it. Rhythm of War, and yeah, can't wait.
Yeah, it's a technically 2 5-book arcs or something. We don't really know what that means because we're still in the middle of it, but supposedly there's going to be a really nice, clean breakpoint at book 5, so it's not going to be like 14-book series Wheel of Time. You hit the 6th book and you're like,
Yes.
like I think there's actually supposed to be some sort of big conclusion by book 5.
And before you go, by the way, if you are thinking about getting this book, you can listen to it on Audible, which is, you can go to audibletrial.com/Travis Gafford. There's a link in the description. We'll talk more about it halfway through this, but I just wanted to shout that out because you can get it for free if you are a first-time subscriber. Anyway, so Mark, this is what's interesting. So I have read all of the Stormlight Archive books twice, I want to say, but I have not read this book in several years. I think the second finish for it was probably like, 2017, 2018 for me. So you have spoiled yourself on a ton of Brandon Sanderson stuff, but you actually did just finish this book recently, correct?
Yeah, I read this one and finished it sometime at the start of this year, beginning of 2020. Then I read Words of Radiance, and I'm a third of the way through Oathbringer right now. And yeah, I spoiled the hell out of myself. I'm a deep, like, 17th shard copper mine, digging through all the wikis, reading Words of Brandon. So, like, I kind of know what's already coming, but, I don't know the plots 100%, even though I know, like, a lot of the Cosmere significant things.
Well, so this is what I was going to ask you to do, and I think this will potentially be helpful for people who have maybe read the book or listened to it a long time ago and are, clicking on this video because they know who we are from our esports stuff and want to know more about it. So either way, can you give us kind of the highlights of what's happening in this book?
Yeah, so this book is primarily, it's the Kaladin viewpoint book. Every one of these books has a flashback character that will have a little sequence leading up to kind of the start of their plots in these. Kaladin's is about how he was a surgeon, or his dad was a surgeon, and wanting him to be a surgeon. He wanted to be a soldier, and kind of all the things that lead him up to this book, where he ends up a slave in an army doing bridge runs, which are basically hauling bridges for people to cross. We'll get into all the setting and stuff.
Right.
He has a whole arc about eventually being freed from that slavery by Dalinar, who is another one of the viewpoint characters, who's a high prince of war kind of guy, and
the brother to the king who was murdered, and so he's kind of dealing with the balance of like trying to be a leader but not a leader because his nephew is technically the king, and that's a very interesting dynamic. But also he's going through some other stuff, right?
Yeah, he's kind of he's not sure if he's going crazy. He's having these epileptic almost visions where he will feel like they're totally real, but in the real world he is like writhing on the floor and foaming at the mouth. So his sons and close friends all think he might be going crazy. He's not sure himself, and he's in this weird position of not knowing what to do while they're fighting this war to get revenge for the people who assassinated his brother, the king.
Right.
The
Parshendi.
And then the Parshendi, yeah. Yes. Then way into like left field, there's Shallan's character, the third and kind of final viewpoint character. She's in a totally different setting. She's in this city called Kharbranth. She's studying or wants to become an understudy of Yasna, who is the
Dalinar's niece.
Dalinar's niece, yeah. And so she's in this city trying to learn under her for her own reasons. Her family's going bankrupt. She's trying to steal something from Yasna to be able to pay off their debts, and then kind of gets caught up in this whole overarching story that's going on because Yasna is very, very important to a lot of the major plot developments.
Yeah, and Yasna is kind of
Superwoman.
Superwoman. Very, very badass. It's very funny. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people have described her as, or like the fandom has decided she's like thick. To use that term.
I always describe her as curvaceous every time Brandon talks about her.
Right, yes. Brandon Sanderson, the author, by the way. I realized we haven't explained who Brandon is, but I assume people know, since maybe if they're watching this, they've read it. But so, you also didn't mention Adolin is also a viewpoint character, correct?
Yeah, he's technically like Brandon has these like headers on top of each chapter that will let you know kind of which plot you're in, but there are different viewpoint characters within those. So Adolin is kind of tucked into Dalinar's, but he does get a fair amount of the point of view chapters.
Yes. And I think what's interesting, just as we're catching up on this stuff, is like I've been going and reading or watching a lot of Brandon Sanderson's YouTube videos about just at writing and all that stuff for people who are interested in writing or the art of writing. There's a ton of different lectures he has, and he does these kind of 2-hour long live streams too that always get archived right now because he's actually promoting the leather bound Kickstarter for this. So by the way, if you like this book a lot and you want to go spend $200 on a very, very nice copy of it that is signed, they're doing a Kickstarter right now, so shout out to that. But with regards to Adolin, what's interesting is Adolin, I don't believe, based off of what he was saying, was originally going to be a viewpoint character in this book. And he added Adolin in because there was a really weird thing where, like, Dalinar is supposed to seem like a badass, but originally all the Adolin chapters were Dalinar doubting himself. So you kind of had this weird dichotomy of a character where, like, Dalinar is supposed to be, like, really badass and like think about the journey he's going on and all that stuff, but then you had all these chapters where he's like filled with self-doubt, and it really kind of like took away from the character. So they added in Adolin as sort of this viewpoint to create this conflict of like Adolin thinking his dad is going crazy and maybe needs to step down versus whatever.
Yeah, he took a lot of like the internal doubt and put it in Adolin. So some of the conflict in this book is Dalinar being like, no, I'm not crazy, and Adolin being like, Dad, you're like tweaking on the floor. Like, I don't know if we want to trust everything going through your head right now.
Yes.
And he loves his dad. It's not like he's being a jerk about it. He's just he thinks his dad's getting older and stuff, and so he thinks he's having like episodes, I think is what they call them.
So the other character that hasn't been mentioned yet is Zeth's son Villano, who wore white on the day. Yeah, True List of Shinovar, who wore white on the day he was to kill the king.
Yeah. It's a big meme if you haven't read the book that like pretty much anytime he gets mentioned the first time, he's the assassin in white, and it's the same kind of like intro-y thing.
Right.
He's kind of the one that is involved in a lot of like the overarching things going on in this book. As the first book in the 10-book series, we haven't really talked at all about the overarching plot of the series, and you only get like the very beginning of it in this book, but he is very important to that. So like we kind of mentioned the king getting killed. That happens in the prologue, and it kicks off all the events of the war.
Right.
There's a group of people called the Parshendi. They are not human. I did not know this the first time I was listening to the book before I went back and reread it. Because I was like driving, and I must have missed the part where it's like they're not technically human. They are humanoid.
Well, so what's funny is I had the opposite reaction. Was that because they talk so much about kind of like the scarab style of them or whatever, I thought these were like not humanoid. Like they were kind of humanoid, but I thought that they were like they had like a shell or something. Yeah, I didn't think they were crabs, but I definitely thought. I'm trying to think of an example. Mass Effect has like a race that is kind of that is very like scarab like, and so I did not really. It wasn't until later on and some more descriptions of them in later books and some of the art that I'd seen that I really started to realize like they are way closer to humans than I thought. But yes, they are not humans. They've got sort of a sort of they not like Klingons, but kind of like Klingons. And I think in the way where Klingons have the sort of
If someone doesn't know what a Klingon is, you're not
exaggerated feature.
helping
How many
describe
people don't know what a Klingon is?
I don't know what a Klingon visually looks like. I know it's from Star Trek and they're the bad guys.
All right. I think the
They
vast
look
majority
like
of people that would
humans.
watch this know what a Klingon looks like. They've seen Worf or whatever. Anyway, sorry. Continue.
They're more humanoid than crap.
We're talking about
but-
Parshendi.
Yeah, Parshendi, they're humanoids. They are kind of chitness. We'll get into the world a little bit about because there is a very consistent style to the world
Yes.
of like the ecology and everything, and they kind of match that. And they were thought to be savages. They bump into them. They're in some kind of peace talks and signing a treaty or something when they hire Seth to kill Gavilar, who is the king of the Alethi and all this culture that's most of the main characters are a part of. And then they go to war, and a lot of this stuff is all at war when they're in this place called the Shattered Plains, which is where all that war is taking place.
So now that we've kind of reviewed the and maybe let's talk about just the end. This is the big spoiler part because this will help people who have read all the books. Like for me, before we were talking about this beforehand, like I have a hard time delineating between book 1 and book 2, etc. But maybe you can tell me what all is happening towards the end.
Yeah, so there's one other thing in the background of this, which is like this herald and desolations and like this kind of ancient history stuff. It's Brandon Sanderson. He's going to have a lot of like complexity going on, so it's hard to wrap it all up. But there is this kind of ancient war that supposedly has repeated thousands of times called the Desolations, and they come every so often. So climax of this book, Kaladin's a bridgeman, Dalinar is a high prince. They're at war. Dalinar gets betrayed by somebody, and he's kind of stranded on these shattered plains, which are like plateaus, basically.
He's at the tower, right?
Yeah, he's at the one called the Tower. It's like a big, important plateau. And basically the only way to get across the gaps in the plateaus are with these bridges. Kaladin turns around to go save Dalinar.
After he's been betrayed by Sadeas.
After he's been betrayed by Sadeas. I assume we'll get a little bit more in-depth with each of the personal character arcs, but the big overarching one is Kaladin saves Dalinar. In doing so, begins to awaken these ancient powers that used to be used in these ancient wars. Kaladin kind of becomes a beast for a little bit, saves Dalinar, and in return, Dalinar frees Kaladin's bridgemen, all his comrades and stuff, and they become his personal bodyguards. During this time as well, Shallan has this big thing where she figures out who the Voidbringers are, which are the people that were fighting in the Desolations. Humans would fight the Voidbringers, and it turns out the Voidbringers are the Parshendi, supposedly, and she's able to figure that out. And so they realize this war that they're fighting is a lot more than just this revenge war. It actually has a lot of like worldwide importance.
And Team Dalinar, I think, also realizes that the visions that Dalinar is having are not like insanity.
Yes. He thinks these visions are coming from their perception of God, the Almighty. And in one of the final visions you learn, the Almighty is dead. He was killed by the enemy who is like kind of on the desolation side with the Voidbringers and stuff. And so, he realizes he's not going crazy. This war is nuts. Everything's going to get much worse very soon because the desolation is supposedly coming again.
Yeah.
And he is the only one who kind of has this knowledge, and he knows he's not crazy by the end because they're able to interpret some of an ancient language through his murmuring while he's like spazzing out on the floor.
But he gets validated essentially.
He gets personally validated, but a lot of people still are a little.
But his like team, I think his group, like Navani and
Navani's
Adolin,
like his girlfriend, kind of.
Yeah. Yes. His sister-in-law / girlfriend.
It's a 400,000 word book, so it's kind of hard to wrap up everything that happened. But
I want to put the highlights out there. I don't think that when we talk about the stuff, I don't think it's to help people who haven't read the book. It's just we're letting people catch back up on all the stuff that they perhaps forgot.
Yeah.
So it's a recap and a review. That's what this video is.
The recap part's done. Let's start getting into.
So I'm going to tell you the shit that I loved, and what really drew me into this book. At a high level, right? We can talk about individual incidents, but the reason why Brandon Sanderson gets me so frequently and why this book, I love any book that has sort of this callback to like some sort of ancient world, right? Like either, civilizations that were super powerful and we don't know what they were about, but there's kind of like rumors about it, or like an ancient magic that was lost, and perhaps so that stuff I super love. And then I also love magic systems, and this series, and we only start to see sort of the tip of the iceberg in this, but we got like soulcasters and fabrials and all that stuff in this, and the magic systems are quite good. So those are the two foundations for me that really drew me into the world beyond all the kind of crazy stuff. So those are like the big things that really got me into this world. I'm kind of curious, like, what were the things that you really liked?
For me, I love good endings. I love when everything ties up nicely and there's the twists and the turns. And Brandon Sanderson is probably one of the best plotters in fantasy.
Yeah.
Like every detail ends up kind of mattering, and he does a good job of dropping them on you where you don't think they matter. It just sounds like some kind of offhanded comment, and then it turns into a whole thing. So I really like his endings. They always come together.
Sanderlanche is what
The
people call it.
Sanderlanche, as they call them in the fandom. I love those. What I will admit, I was not immediately drawn into this book. I actually false started on it as an audiobook because I was like, this is just, I don't know, it's too much for me.
Right.
In terms of like, it's so alien. Like, this is probably one of the weirdest fantasy worlds. I mean, I'm not like a prolific fantasy reader, but it's definitely one of the
Well, and he
weirder
definitely just dunks
Drops
you
you
in, right? Like when you're reading about rock buds and high storms and all this stuff, it is
shard blades.
Yeah, it is very difficult to even like the animals are different, right? And
the wagons are pulled by Chull.
Yeah.
Chull are these, like, kind of describes them like, what am I seeing? Like, in my mind's eye, I don't know what the hell I'm seeing.
Yeah, and I get that he kind of needs to submerge you, but you almost kind of wish, like, the very simple way to understand why everything is the way it is in this world is like high storms exist.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say as well is that the book, and this is something that for why I think I had a better job with it on my second attempt, is it has like all these like drawings.
Yeah.
And these go a long way for helping me visualize what a chull is. It's a giant hermit crab.
Right.
Is what it is. And like, you get to see a little drawing of some of this stuff to help bridge the gap from the alien nature of it.
But essentially the idea is that the high storms are these crazy hurricanes that ravage the land every, roughly like 7 to 14 days. That's kind of an infrequent thing. But and so the whole world has had to evolve around the idea of like, what if you had to survive a hurricane every 7 to 14 days? A magical one. And so every animal has like a shell that it could draw into to help survive during these times, and like plants like drawing on themselves, and
there's no dirt, everything is stone.
Yes.
I mean, like, so I guess since we're in setting, we'll just talk setting. Like,
sure,
this is one of the things I love about the book is like how thought out all of the ecology is, and like the impact of, you're talking about culturally, about like the hurricanes and like the bunkers everyone has, and also this thing carries Stormlight, which is like the energy juice for magic in this world.
Energy juice, yes.
It's investiture if we want to use proper Cosmere terms.
Right. No, I like energy juice.
Oh yeah, it's the energy juice for the magic system, and so like everything kind of everything evolves around the high storms, and eventually, not spoilers for the thing, but it's obviously going to be a plot point too, not just a setting point.
Right. And so I think I think that is quite remarkable about this, and I think it's really cool. I will say that I don't know, so I do kind of wish that we saw more of the magic system in this book. And that is, I think, one criticism I would have of the book in general. I don't know if we're moving away from setting, but
I think magic system goes into setting more than character or plot.
Is that like there are a lot of for the first book, it's like I really want people to get into this thing, and probably if people are watching this video, maybe they have, but I do think a lot of people abandon the book, in part because not only is it overwhelming, but also you don't get to experience most of what this world has to give you in the first book.
Yeah, it's all in the Shattered Plains for the most part. I mean, there's Kharbranth as well,
right?
But it's kind of just a library for like Shallan's only in the library there for the most part.
For the potential that the magic system has, and I don't feel bad sort of alluding to it because you start to see a lot of that towards the end of this, but like Like soulcasters are so boring. It's like, oh look, I could turn this into grain. Like
I mean, the way Yasna uses it is
the way
pretty
Yasna uses
hypey.
it is quite cool, right? Like
She just blows people up.
there
She like transforms
was
her
a
body into
meme.
fire or something.
There was a meme that I linked to somebody today. By the way, don't go to the subreddit if you are interested in reading more of Brandon Sanderson's wider stuff. But there's one called Creme Posting that has like amazing memes from all across his universe, and will combine different stuff. But it was like hey Shalon, or Yasna saying to Shalon, do you like philosophy? Shalon goes, what? And then Yasna just shoots a man in the heart. And it's like that. There you go. I mean, it's there are some pretty good dramatic moments like that in this which I think are good. It's just I do think you don't get to see. You have to do a lot of homework in this book, and you don't get to see what your grade is or your score is until the next couple of books.
And to be fair, Brandon says, that this was intentional, and he knew this because he had Mistborn and Wheel of Time and a number of things underneath his belt where he was like, okay, I think audiences should trust me enough to kind of have to slog through a little bit to get to the payoffs. And it's definitely true. But if it's your first Brandon Sanderson book, you might not have that trust for him. And it's just, people will always tell you, oh, it's worth it. It is worth it. But I mean, there's a number of things that contribute to the arguably slow opening. Just sticking with setting though, it is super alien and super weird. And the magic system, he shows you a bunch of it in the prologue, and then you don't see it forever.
Right. So I want to take a quick pause really quickly to talk about our affiliate deal, our sponsor. I don't know. We're working it out. We work with them and recommend them as a sponsor. I'm going to say sponsor. This is an ad. Anyway,
yeah, that's how you do it. It's an ad. We're not sponsored, but this is an ad.
If they're watching this, they're going to be like, what? How have we signed a deal with this? Anyway, they're awesome. Audible, of course, is who I'm talking about. So I've actually been an Audible member for over 10 years. I took a couple brief breaks whenever I was not, listening to books for a bit. But for the most part, I've been an Audible member for all this time. And I gotta say, it is my favorite way to consume literature. I guess if that's the way you want to put it.
As an illiterate person, yeah, it's the best.
Well, so I think, growing up, I really liked reading. And then as an adult, I found that it was really difficult to do as much as I wanted to because I'm so busy playing video games or doing any number of different things, right? And living in Los Angeles, I can tell you, I spend a lot of time in traffic. Even though I work from home, anytime you want to go anywhere, you're going to spend time in traffic. Whenever I traveled a lot, not this year, but in previous years, you spend a lot of time on airplanes. There's just so much time in which you can be listening to something, and I would not be doing this YouTube channel if it wasn't for Audible, because Name of the Wind was the book that I started listening to, and we'll do a whole nother thing on that. And it really got me into modern fantasy, and that was on Audible. So audibletrial.com/Travis Gafford. There's a link in the description below, and hopefully we have that up on screen, depending how we edit this. But you can get a free audiobook, and they have a whole bunch of other things, by the way. They got originals. They've got a slew of other things that are included in the membership. You can check it all out on the page. But obviously, since we're talking about books, you can listen to this book, Way of Kings. Maybe you want to re-listen to it before the fourth book comes out, or maybe you haven't read the second or third, you want to get back into it based off of this. You can go check that out. Mark, you've been listening to a book on Audible right now.
I've been listening to the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, narrated by Stephen Pacey. And so Nick Podell and Name of the Wind as well got me into like fantasy and reading again. I hadn't really read a book in like 10 years after high school, and then that kind of got me back into it. And First Law is one I started also just straight up reading as well, but First Law is one where like the narration is so good that like I cannot imagine this series without Stephen Pacey narrating Glocta and stuff.
Yes.
Like he's this guy who's got all his teeth knocked out. He's like this crippled torturer, and like he gives him this hilarious lisp as he's torturing people and like having all these horribly dark thoughts, and it's like this perfect combination of like light and dark, and Stephen Pacey just nails it, and it's so it brings a whole new layer that you would not get by reading.
So if it's this book, which we're talking about, Way of Kings, or if it's the First Law trilogy, you can go check those out at audibletrial.com/Travis Gafford. Get your free audiobook today. Check out what else they have over there. And I can say I absolutely love this stuff. And it's so cool to now be doing content on this thing that I've become so passionate about and having a deal with Audible to promote this stuff too. So either way, thanks so much to Audible for their support. All right, getting back into it, Mark. So
all right, I think we're pretty much done with setting. I don't think there's too much more to talk about.
Yeah, and I don't want this video to go too long. So maybe what do you want to talk? Characters?
I would just say that, yeah, like setting is really cool. Characters, this was a big, I think, pain point for me early on. It's just Kaladin and his like downward slope,
Yes.
which is his first, like the first arc of the book really follows Kaladin and Shallan, but Kaladin gets a little bit more time, and he's a slave. And then it's just like this slide from like going into an army slave, and then they're on these like bridge runs where people just get massacred all the time, to like getting fully suicidal and walking to the edge and almost killing himself, but
Right.
not doing it.
Yes.
But that is a different intro to fantasy.
And I think what is interesting to me is it was tough. I don't like to consume a lot of stuff, movies, TV shows that are really depressing, right? Like I'm not interested in seeing
I love nihilistic things.
Les Miserables. I'm not interested in that. Like I mean, I like BoJack Horseman, for instance, which is pretty cynical, but I don't tend to like things where it's just like a character is beaten down over and over and over again. Terrible things happen. Blah blah blah. It's just, for me, it can be a little too bleak whenever I'm looking for something that's a bit more of an escape. So it was tough sometimes with the Kaladin stuff for me. However, I do want to say, even if it was tough, and sometimes like I feel intimidated by doing like a third read on that book, the amount of times that I have seen people who say like, hey, I suffer a lot from depression, or hey, you know, a lot of like, I was able to connect with Kaladin because I've had moments like that or experiences like that, I think is pretty remarkable. And I think a lot of other fantasy authors would shy away from it. So I think that's one reason why, even if it could be tough for me sometimes, I do really appreciate what he did with Kaladin.
And every character in this book has some form of mental, not illness, but like some sort of thing that they're struggling with, whether it's addiction, PTSD, multiple personalities. Kaladin's is depression.
What is Zeth's?
I mean, he hears screaming in his head when he closes his eyes.
Yeah. I'm not disputing. It's just sort of like, I don't even know where to start with that character.
It is a core theme of the magic system, that like the broken people, in air quotes. And Kaladin's depression is good, as well depicted, and all of them are well depicted, which Brandon gets a lot of credit for, because he does do a lot of like beta reading and working with sensitivity readers. He gets brain fog right, which is like, if you don't know someone with depression, you might not know what brain fog is. But he is able to kind of represent that in the book in one of the flashback chapters that I think I've seen a lot of people talk about. Like, oh, hey, that's actually like pretty accurate.
Right.
So even if you know, like, this character is really beaten down, you're like, oh my god, what more can go wrong with this person? At least you know that like, one, it's going somewhere good, and two, that like it's done very faithfully, or like well adapted.
And I think it's funny because it took me a very long time to have a favorite character in this series, and I don't even know if I had a favorite character in this book. I know what it is who it is later on. I don't want to say it because I don't want to leave even the hint of spoilers, but we'll talk. I'll reveal it later. But in this book, I think Kaladin was the one I was most interested in, just because like he starts getting pretty badass later on. But it was tough for a while.
It was Dalinar for me, just because Kaladin is so like beat down at the beginning. When you get introduced to Dalinar, which is like a couple hundred pages into the book proper, you kind of hear about him before, but like this is when you actually start getting his POV chapters. He was like, Kaladin's like at the very bottom rung of the army, and like he doesn't even know why he's there. You know, like he knows that they're fighting the Parshendi for revenge,
right? But
it's this big kind of like, why the hell are we doing bridge runs these ways? It's like a waste. And he's like,
well, he's so immature in so many places too. Like it's just so annoying.
Right, and then you get Dalinar, who is like at the top of the army, and he understands everything going on, all the strategy, and so like I enjoyed getting like a lot more of the plot in some ways, whereas like Kaladin's chapters are very like introspective in a lot of ways, and a lot of the development is about him and like his little band of soldiers that he's trying to level up. Dalinar is like trying to end the war, you know, and I appreciate that a lot more.
Yeah, no, it's true. Maybe my favorite was Dalinar. I don't know. I 100% know in later books who my favorite character is, and so that's I think what
Type
it
it to
is.
me on Skype because now I'm curious.
Well, we'll talk about it later. I've talked
Oh,
about
in
it.
this book?
No,
Or
no,
in
no.
this?
I'm saying we've talked about it. You and I have talked about it later. We'll talk about another thing.
All right. For me, Shallan has to be the weakest.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a common criticism. It's tough because she is so disconnected from the rest of the
The
story.
Shattered Plains.
Yeah. And I definitely think it. I know we're hesitant to talk too much about Brandon Sanderson. I think gets better at writing women as time has progressed, and I think there are a lot of instances where I don't feel as though he's the best at it, and Shallan is a pretty good example of that. Conversely, I really like Yasna, but I do think like
Superwoman. How can you not like her?
yeah. But I think part of that is just like anytime you create Brandon talks a lot about like competency as a means of making people like characters, and like Yasna is just like maybe the most competent character in this. Dalinar is pretty up there, but Dalinar is also like what the hell is going on? He's struggling a lot and can't figure stuff out. So but Yasna just seems like
more
she's
problems.
badass. Yeah.
Because we haven't been in Yasna's head. She
Right.
might have plenty. But like Shallan, my problems with her are like one, I don't like Brandon Sanderson's. He makes me laugh. Like this is I'll spoil
I know
a
what you're
little
about
bit
to say. The puns.
the puns are so bad and the wordplay is something I just don't find funny even in real life, and like that's her entire personality, and like the first part of the book is just like these like she's like very not confident, which is like another thing that people can say like on that likability scale, but like just the humor does not land for me. He can make me laugh. He has made me laugh out loud at other parts, so I don't think it's just like Brandon sucks at writing humor, but like her humor kills me. Same with wit. It's the same kind of like and like characters will set themselves up where they'll like give one word responses to like
The reason I don't mind Wit is because that's kind of Wit's whole point. Like he is supposed to just be that one character that just makes like stupid jabs at people.
I know, but they're not like I just the something about this the way he does the setup and punchlines are so like transparent that like the person responding never has any like agency. They just go it.
Well, it's also difficult too because I always feel like Brandon is such a. If you watch his streams, like Brandon is just such a wholesome person.
He's a cheeseball, dude.
That oftentimes oftentimes the jokes are just. It's like you smell like cheese, and it's like got him, slammed him or whatever, and it's like and Brandon's thing. You're like, oh yeah, like you smell like cheese. I got you. It's just never. It's never going to be like, I fucked your mom.
I hadn't sworn on this yet because I didn't know if we were, I've bit my tongue a couple of times, but yeah. And like the thing is, this isn't one of his lectures. He talks about like a way to drive home a point about a person's like skill set or competency or something is to have someone else agree with it.
Yeah.
So if someone says something smart, you have another character go, oh, that's a great point or something.
Right.
And he does that with humor with Shallan, where she's talking to Yalb and they're going through the fucking city and she's just doing quip after quip after quip. And he's like, my milady, you have such a sharp tongue.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, this is all so grating. And like the fact that other people in world find her funny kills me. And it's not, I mean, he kind of addresses it a little bit later, but yeah, I read a theory that like people are just humoring her and she's actually not funny and everyone kind of
I don't think that's it.
I want to believe that theory, but there's not enough textual evidence for me to buy into that. I just don't think the jokes are funny. I think that's where it is. And like you said, her plot is the most disconnected. It all ends up folding in quite nicely later, but early on, her stuff does not seem to play off, and it feels like she's there to exist as a viewpoint of Yasna doing important things in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's true. She's definitely the weakest, and I do think, I don't want to spoil it, but I do think people will feel like she gets better in the later books if
she definitely gets better. She remains not really my favorite, but this was probably one of the parts where it's like the slog that this book kind of has for me. There's a little bit in the beginning with some of this stuff. There's a little bit with the flashbacks with Kaladin where I'm like, I don't care. Tell me the plot, you know? And then there's some with Shallan where I'm like, Jesus, I don't mind when she's like doing things, but when she's like quipping out, I'm just like,
Yeah. I think Sadeas is such a great character.
Sadeas is good.
I want to talk about it. So Again, we talked a lot about this channel, which I think I referenced in the first video that I have not actually filmed yet, so I'm hoping I reference it. Is it's going to be a lot of me talking about at times the things I like about the audiobook, because that's how I'm consuming all this stuff. And Michael Kramer, the narrator, just has this line that I've told Mark before, where like anytime Sadius comes up to say something to Dalinar, he just has the most patronizing way of going, Dalinar, like, come on, you could do this. Oh yes, is the Way of Kings really that important? You know, and it's just he's such a good villainous individual. And you also, like, I really enjoy that you can't ever like really kind of tell what his motivations are. Like, he seems kind of sketchy, but you can kind of trust him. And then like that moment of betrayal is so good. I mean, we always talk about, or you talked a lot about how like the climaxes in these books are always so great, and it's just like as you suddenly start to see everything come into fruition, you see this moment of betrayal, you see Kaladin's decision to like turn back with the crew, and like anytime in these, and I don't think this is too much, like any moment in which Kaladin's ever just like, fine, I'll fucking save the day, you know.
Yeah.
Like those are always great moments, and this book has that, and I think it's fantastic.
You'll definitely get nerd chills a couple times in every one of his books. The Kaladin saying the words as he like runs back is like a pretty big one.
Yeah.
Navani burning the glyph when she thinks Dalinar is dead is a pretty dope one. Like, and there's a lot right at the end when he gives up his shard blade to say, like, you get hit with like 4 nerd chill moments like in rapid succession. And then there's also like all the plot revelations that like there's a part 5 to the book is broken up into parts.
Right.
There's 5 parts, and the 5th part is like super short compared to the others, but it has like all the major plot revelations. I wouldn't have minded a little bit less, a little bit more spread out,
right?
Because it kind of feels so rapid fire at the end. The Ghost Bloods show up, you know, it ties into Shallan's story, and then
yeah, that's kind of the downside. Is like with the Brandon Sanderson novels, it's gonna take a long time to get to the payoff, but because he's collected so much of the stuff in that end there, you know, it's like you don't get as much of it sprinkled throughout.
Yeah, even like Seth and Taravangian pay off a little bit with like the death rattles, and like he was the one ordering all the kings to get assassinated.
I'm so glad you said that, because I forgot if that happened in this, and so I wasn't.
That happened in this one. Yeah, Taravangian is the one. You know, you kind of get the first glimpse of the diagram and all like the different people behind the scenes, and how like the world really opens up right at the end. And I kind of wish they started doing that a little bit more. He does have the interludes, but it's hard to see how they tie in the first book.
Right.
Which I guess we can maybe use to transition to plot and writing and some of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I have less to talk about here. I mean, we've already been kind of, I think, talking a little bit about the plot with the climax and all that, but if there's anything in particular you want to call out.
I'd like the epigraphs and like the interludes and like a lot of the more like writing things that he uses to build the plot, I think.
I mean, I'd say they're a double-edged sword, because it's like you're already drowning in this fucking world of rock buds, chulls, and herdazians.
Then you get to the Pure Lake, and some guy is like, the first interlude, I think, is that
there are like 17 different races of people, and like, what are the Parshendi?
Like
you got flashbacks
heralds
going on. You got different viewpoints. You got interludes. You
got characters that are crossing over from other books that you don't realize until you go on like another website that tells you. And you're like, oh, that interlude was this thing. I thought it was just random world building.
So I will say that like especially the first listen, the interludes hit, and I'm just kind of like, because I will say one thing about listening is like you can kind of choose how involved you are in like the act of listening, right, as opposed to like a book. And the interludes, it's a lot easier for me to kind of tune out, and it's bad that I did, and I'm glad that I went back and listened to the book again, because I became more interested. But yeah, the interludes, it's like when you're just talking about something, and the problem is the interludes are often taking place in an entirely different part of the world with like an entirely different thing happening, and so it could be really confusing.
Yeah. Epigraphs the same way. Like, they're like the little blurbs of text at the start of the chapters, and every part of a book will have a new like kind of epigraph that's going through. Some of them, I don't want to get into too many Cosmere spoilers, but they're like letters between characters that are basically like in other parts of the universe.
Right.
You know, and it's hard to see how they tie in right away, but it does make one of those things where like when you see the strings that are connecting and when you have these kind of moments, you're like, oh my god.
Yeah, it's funny because
it makes rereads a lot better, I guess.
Frequently the things that feel the most easy to throw away in your mind are sometimes the biggest moments of foreshadowing or like world building or whatever, I would say.
Yeah, so like a big one in this is the death rattles. You're getting all these death rattles of people dying, saying kind of like what seem like random things. And it pays off in two ways. Like one, oftentimes, some of them are kind of random, but some of them do hold like nuggets of like very important Cosmere stuff, as well as you find out that Teravangian is like basically not torturing, but like letting people die in his cellar
Yeah.
to like extract these death rattles from people. And then you realize like, oh, what all this is. And it's cool. It's really cool, but it does take a while to like get those payoffs.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's anything else we need to address before we get into the conclusion of the video, but if there's anything else you want to bring up.
How about themes? Let's talk about kidding. Journey before destination, Travis.
Here's one thing I will say.
And it's not about getting to the ending of this video. It's about enjoying.
It'll be easier to talk about this in later books, but one thing that I don't think I see too many people talk about, and maybe I'm just missing this, but like normally sort of philosophical life lesson stuff, it often feels super ham-fisted in fantasy or anything that is not like a deep thoughtful drama. You know what I mean? Like it's difficult sometimes. And I always feel as though like the big commentaries that Brandon tries to convey to people, especially in this series, like actually do hit home for me. You know, like the journey before destination, like a lot of the quotes, a lot of like the realizations that the characters have feel actually very impactful and legitimate in a way that like do good things in the world, you know, thrown in randomly into like a Disney movie doesn't always, you know, I'm like, I see what you're doing there. Yeah,
the lessons are a little less ham-fisted than some other things. The wit, like kind of like story time that sometimes crops up in these books, sometimes for me gets a little like but sometimes I'm also like, is this like because sometimes they're like lore things too, which makes them nice because you're getting a lesson probably with a story that matters in world in some way. Yeah.
Well, so let's bring it in. So here's what I will say. This is my least favorite book of the three that I have read in the series. I anticipate, based off of the things that have been alluded to for book 4 and the fact that he says there's like a big moment in book 4 he's been waiting like his entire life essentially, I expect that book 4 will be my favorite, or at least it'll be maybe right behind book 3. But but I will say this is my favorite series of any of the ones that I've read. It used to be Name of the Wind, but I'm just sad that that's only a 2-book series that never got finished. And so I find this book really remarkable. I don't know how to rate it because I don't have a rating system, but I would rate it as my least favorite, but still my least favorite of my favorite series.
Yeah, I would. I'm only a third of the way through Oathbringer. There's supposedly a slog in that I haven't gotten to yet, so it might change. But right now, I agree it's my least favorite. It's still really good. I would, if I was gonna like slap a rating on it, give it like an 8 out of 10. And the 2 points are mostly from like there are some POVs I don't enjoy reading quite as much. Not like they're terrible, but like they grate on me. And there's definitely a bit of a slog with the flashbacks and all that stuff. But I mean, it's so well made that like once all the pieces start coming together, like especially I don't want to get spoilers, but like it all starts paying off.
Yeah.
In the other books, especially.
So either way, the final thing I will say is like if you maybe have just read this before, you don't know too much about the author, Brandon Sanderson, great guy. Go follow him on Twitter or take a look at his YouTube channel. He's a gamer. He says I don't think he's super into esports, but he plays like Civ and Slay the Spire and a ton of games that I think a lot of people would recognize within this crew of people that watch our content. And I'm just really excited about about book 4. So either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Check out Audible. Again, the link in the description. Any final words, Mark?
Nope. I've always wanted to do like more reviewing and talking about thoughts on media because I'm always watching movies and games and books. So I'm excited to start finally giving my shitty opinion on things.
Great. Well, either way, stay tuned for Mark's shitty opinion when we talk about the next book, book 2 of the Stormlight Archives, coming up soon.